You are listening to an unconventional finance interview with your host, Elijah Johnson. Find us on the web at youtube.com/unconventionalfin.
Back on the show with us today is Michael Rivero from whatreallyhappened.com. Mike Rivero is also a peace activist and a radio show host. Thanks for coming on the show again, Mike.
Oh, my pleasure. It's always fun to come on over and talk with you.
So our last interview got such great feedback, I really wanted to have you on again. And I put out a video asking viewers to submit questions, and they were really excited that you were going to come on the show again. And I got a great turnout of questions, so I guess we'll just start with the first one. The first question is from Mercy. What effect will the European Stability Mechanism, June 2013, have on the world?
I think any talk of stability in regards to any nation or group of nations operating under a private central bank, loaning all the public currency as a loan at interest, is a misnomer. It's very optimistic, but the reality is such a system is inherently unstable. And even Moody's is telling the European Central Bank all they're doing is buying time. They're kicking the can down the road. The reality is that all of this debt that all of these Western nations are suffering under is artificially created through this process of private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. And because of that simple mechanism, the debt is always going to exceed the available money supply. And that is why the only solution to Europe's economic problems is to get rid of the European Central Bank and go back to state banks and value-based currencies. Here in the United States of America, the idea that the Congress transferred the money creation authority granted to them by the Constitution to a private bank with the Federal Reserve Act is ludicrous. Such a fundamental change in the nation's structure should have been done with a constitutional amendment. It could be therefore argued that the Federal Reserve Act itself is unconstitutional, and therefore the Federal Reserve itself is illegal, and that would basically render all of the accumulated debt to that private central bank null and void. And frankly, I think Ron Paul would probably be the only politician we have out there courageous enough to basically look at this situation and say that, something does have to be done here because the debt ultimately is unpayable. And if you want to make a payment on the loans that you got from the Federal Reserve last year, you have to borrow more money from the Federal Reserve this year to pay that interest. And it's an inescapable system. It's designed that way, and it's a fatal design flaw. It cannot be made to work forever, but obviously the people who create these private central banks don't care about that. They live lives of comfort and luxury and wealth until they die, and then they figure it's somebody else's problem to deal with the mess afterwards. And that's exactly where we are right now. We are the generation that has inherited almost 100 years of increasing debt because we are enslaved to a banking system that by design creates more debt than money. The irony of this is we are currently enslaved to exactly the same sort of banking system that we fought a revolution to be free of back in 1776.
The next question actually fits right in here. It's from Ronald. You said in your last interview with Elijah, and just to point out in this interview right now, that because all money is created out of debt with interest attached, in order to pay the interest on the money borrowed into existence, you have to borrow more money into existence. But if banks spend the money collected from interest back into the economy to be re-earned, you wouldn't have to borrow more money into existence, right?
No, because banks don't spend the money back into the system. They loan it. All currency in circulation is the proceed of a loan. Money is never just handed out by anybody. And that is really why the Federal Reserve System is a pyramid or Ponzi scheme. And we've had 3 of these same private central banks, and all 3 have brought the nation to the edge of ruin. Over in Great Britain, the Bank of England was on the verge of destroying their country, which is why Great Britain wound up having to nationalize the Bank of England and basically bring it back under control. Every nation, unfortunately, that talks about having a state bank and a value-based currency comes under attack by the United States of America, and that is really, again, the irony. We are forcing onto other countries at the point of a bayonet exactly the same kind of banking system we fought a revolution to be free of. I know in our schools they always talk about the Stamp Act and the tea tax and all these other things as the cause of the revolution, but they very rarely mention this idea of of the Currency Act, which was passed by King George III. And what the Currency Act did was it ordered all the American colonies to conduct their commerce only using banknotes borrowed at interest from the Bank of England. And the poverty and unemployment that this created is what led to the anger that led to the revolution.
If I could just ask, you said that the banks don't spend money back into the economy, they loan it. But then in that case, where does the money to pay the bankers come from? Isn't that the bank spending the money back into the economy?
Again, the money that is paid in wages and salaries isn't given out by the bank. It is loaned by the bank to your employer at interest. Again, you need to understand money does not enter circulation anywhere in the United States of America that does not start with a loan from the private Federal Reserve. The money is loaned to the government to pay out in checks for Social Security or Medicare or employee salaries. Money is loaned to businesses to make their payroll. Money is loaned to businesses to buy inventory to build their places of business. Money is loaned to other banks, which then loan it out to their customers. Money is loaned to individual consumers through credit cards, car loans, student loans, housing loans. All money is created by virtue of a loan, and there are no exceptions. All of these bailouts represent more loans taken out on the credit of the American people. We had Dr. Paul Craig Roberts on my show about 2 weeks ago. And what he said is the problem the U.S. government faces right now, the U.S. government will print up treasury bills and send them over to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve will then print up money that it is loaned back to the government to put into circulation. The problem is that treasury bills are backed up by the future slave labor of the American people, a promise that somewhere down the road, the American people will be forced to turn over their work product in the form of taxes for which nothing will be given back in order to make good on the treasury bonds. The problem is the U.S. government and the Treasury have been printing up so many Treasury bonds, there literally are not enough live Americans to redeem all of these bonds. And so now there is a Treasury bond bubble that nobody wants to talk about. But at some point, that's going to come crashing down, and the whole thing is going to fall apart. Everybody at this point says a crash is unavoidable, which is why our government is so desperate to try and start a war as a distraction.
The next question is from Linny B. What really happened to Argentina's banking system? Who looted that country's banking system? And what's the real story behind the Argentina financial crisis?
Well, Argentina, like so many other countries in South America, applied to the United States for loans of Federal Reserve notes in order to do commerce with the United States. Then we would see, like the Central Intelligence Agency, go in and commit acts of crop sabotage, various other dirty tricks, to put it bluntly, in order to prevent those countries from paying their debts back, in order to get them into such a state of indebtedness they couldn't get out, that all the money they were sending was basically making payments on the interest, and the principal was never addressed, which is, by the way, the same circumstance we have in the United States of America. All of the money taken out of your taxes and sent over to the Federal Reserve is paying on the interest only. The principal of the federal debt has never been reduced. And it's a way of trapping a nation in this sense of a debt obligation in order to control them. And it's no surprise throughout most of the 50s and 60s and into the 70s, the U.S. government was using the main banks on Wall Street as tools of covert foreign policy. Ultimately, of course, any nation with a debt-based currency has to collapse sooner or later. As far as the actual assets of the bank being looted, probably members of the government went in there as well. We know that large amounts of the gold, which Gaddafi had planned to back the gold dinar with, vanished following that invasion. So as far as who's doing the looting, well, we know Wall Street likes to do a lot of looting. They've been doing it with LIBOR. They were doing it with the mortgage-backed security fraud. The whole system really is crooked from top to bottom, and it's perhaps not surprising that a poll was taken among Wall Street workers a couple of months ago, where basically 25% of the people working on Wall Street in the financial services industry, admitted to routinely engaging in fraud and went so far as to say that if the fraud were to stop, Wall Street would collapse immediately.